take my hand, take my whole life too. Growing up, I obviously knew of Elvis Presley. I mean, who didn't? Everyone knows of Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley is iconic. He's the king of rock and roll. But, obviously, growing up, I was born in the year 2000. The kids in the 2000s, we knew of Elvis, but we never, were obsessed with Elvis. And he's great. Don't get me wrong, his music is great. And I knew of some songs like Hound Dog and Can't Help Falling in Love and all that. But realistically, I would never have, professed to call myself an Elvis fan. Especially not in the way this film portrays it, because, female Elvis fans were crazy. But if there's one thing Baz Luhrmann's musical biopic of Elvis Presley did, it was turn me into an Elvis Presley fanatic. Elvis Presley has now jumped straight to the top as my favourite musician of all time. I absolutely love and adore his music. Everything about it, even when the songs aren't the most upbeat or cheerful. For example, Heartbreak Hotel, it's a suicide song. But the way Elvis Presley sings it, he just makes it so, soulful. You can really just feel everything in his voice. I'm gonna be so lonely, baby. I'm gonna be so lonely. I'll be so lonely, I could die. Not to mention the fact that Elvis can pretty much just sing everything. For example, his cover of Sweet Caroline, the Neil Diamond song, is phenomenal. And dare I say it, I think his cover is actually better than the original. And I think one of the movie's strongest highlights is its narrative thrust. It manages to create a narrative of Elvis Presley's career and his relationship with Colonel Tom Parker. If you're going into this movie expecting the true life story of Elvis Presley, you're not really going to get it because, one, it's a Baz Luhrmann film, so it's going to be incredibly stylistic. But two, Baz Luhrmann mainly portrays the idea of the legacy and the legend of Elvis Presley. In many ways, he's crafted a superhero film based on Elvis Presley being the superhero and Colonel Tom Parker being the supervillain. Right from the get-go, when we see Elvis on stage, not only do we get the 70s-like panel montage, which is also reminiscent of comic book panels, but also you have Elvis in the jumpsuit, you have the cape in the jumpsuit, you have the superhero belt, but also as Baz Luhrmann showcases Austin Butler's dance moves as Elvis Presley, showing Elvis to be super acrobatic and energetic, Baz Luhrmann is presenting the idea that Elvis Presley is a superhero. Not to mention his voice. But also, as the film continues, Baz Luhrmann keeps hammering home the idea that Elvis Presley is a hero by giving us Elvis's backstory through comic book panels, basically, solidifying the idea that he's a comic book hero, to the hair and makeup team constantly giving Austin Butler's Elvis the classic superhero Jerry curl, which was inspired by Elvis's favorite comic book hero, Captain Marvel Jr., which they established in the Ferris wheel scene. But also, there is that thematic idea of that Elvis wants to fly and he wants to keep flying, and by the end, when Elvis is burning himself out by performing too much and taking too much drugs and all that, and his health is slowly declining, as he's in the plane, he explains the idea of this story about a bird who doesn't have any legs and how it flies until it can no longer fly, and once it stops flying, it dies. Because the bird thematically represents Elvis, because throughout the whole film, he keeps saying how he wants to fly. And that ending sequence, man, is just, it's heartbreaking. It really hit me because in many ways it is the artistic plight. Yes, Elvis Presley was incredibly privileged throughout his career. The money, the glitz, the glamour, the girls, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when you're an artist, you are kind of worrying about this idea of legacy and the idea that your work you're creating is authentic and how you're never satisfied. And when he tells Priscilla in that car, I'm gonna be 40 soon. 40. And I never felt like I made that perfect record. Or I never felt like I made that movie I could be proud of. You feel it because, yeah, Elvis Presley died so young at 42 years old. He had so much more potential and so much more to give, and you could feel that. That line really just resonates because I believe Elvis Presley probably did have more to give. He did want to make more films and perfect his acting career whilst also making more music. And it's incredibly heartbreaking because it was all taken away from him because the Colonel caught him in a trap, not to reference Suspicious Minds, and worked him to essentially his death. 'Cause I'm caught in a trap, I can't walk out. Because Colonel's got big debts, baby. Security, 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 security. Also, the editing choice to cut away from Austin Butler as Elvis singing Unchained Melody to the real Elvis Presley singing Unchained Melody was nothing short of chill-inducing. it's phenomenal. And speaking of the main man himself, Austin Butler as Elvis Presley, what a performance. He doesn't look exactly like Elvis Presley, but he does resemble him close enough. And when you look at the other actors who were considered to play Elvis, you had Ansel Elgort, Miles Teller, and Harry Styles. I actually think Miles Teller looks probably the most like Elvis out of the bunch, and I feel like if Miles Teller got this role, he would have done a good job because Miles Teller is great, and also he did do the singing in Top Gun Maverick when he sung Great Balls of Fire. But when you look at Austin Butler's performance, I mean, man, he just became Elvis Presley in mind, body, and soul. Every ounce of his performance just feels authentic and genuine. He is Elvis Presley. He isn't just doing an Elvis Presley impression. He really is just channeling the spirit of Elvis. And I think he even said that in an interview once, that as he was doing his performance as Elvis, he could feel the spiritual hand of Elvis like guiding him throughout his scenes. Like, that to me is amazing, and you can kind of just tell that that energy is on screen. He for sure delivered the best performance of any actor in 2022. To me, everything he did was just incredibly gripping. I believed everything he did, from him playing the teenage Elvis, to the young adult Elvis, to the elder Elvis. I bought everything down to the singing, the way he changed his voice as well throughout the entire film. Perfect. Like, even in the musical numbers, like for example in the Vegas Suspicious Mind sequence, he isn't doing the exact same thing the original Elvis did, but his moves get close enough to it. Like for example when Elvis is all like, but if an old friend I know, and like, you know, he does the lean in and he gets closer to the mic. Austin does that too, but it doesn't feel like he's hitting a beat. It just feels like he's just getting to that point naturally. Suspicious mind, so if an old friend I know, shove it up her nose, try to say hello. And speaking of his voice, let's address the Austin Butler voice controversy, just because it's such a silly, stupid thing that people are either hating Austin Butler for, or just like pointing out and just going like, oh my god, wow, it's insane. Like, yes, him playing Elvis did change his voice. His voice is much more deeper and a little bit raspier and has a bit more bass to it with a tiny bit of a southern twang. And if you look at older interviews, he doesn't necessarily have the southerness to it, but his voice is also still deep. Like if you watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, his voice is fairly similar, it's just not as bassy as it was in Elvis.
Alright, well just give me a moment to turn it around. Okay, stop yelling, hold your horses, we're leaving.
There's a lot of people saying a lot of things. Of course, you gotta listen to the people that you love, but in the end, you gotta listen to yourself.
So my publicist told me, you know, people are talking about your voice and these sorts of things, and it really made me self-conscious for a second, because I thought, am I being phony? Is this not my voice?
But then also you have people putting clips of Austin Butler when he's like 18, 19, 20 years old, and they're comparing it to him now. And it's like, yeah, of course his voice dropped. He's like 30 years old. But then you also just have the people that are necessarily hating on him, just being like, oh, he sucks, blah, blah, blah. Why is he still doing the voice for? Blah, blah, blah. He's just a one-trick pony. And I'm like, that's really mean, but also, what is the purpose and why are you hating? Because you're acting like the Elvis voice is like a really horrible sounding thing. The Elvis Presley voice is really smooth and sexy and deep and it's great. I don't know why you're hating on the man for. Like, it's a great sounding thing. You're acting like he talks like this all the time. Like, hey, I'm Austin Butler and I played Elvis Presley.
You blood-sucking old vampire, you bled me dry and you still want more?
You blood-sucking old vampire. You bled me dry and you still want more? But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up just because that whole voice controversy thing is just so silly. Like, he did alter his voice a bit, but it's not as much as people are exaggerating it to be. Now getting on to Tom Hanks as Colonel Tom Parker. Oh god. I kind of love Tom Hanks in this movie. My boy. Yes, I will not argue the fact that Tom Hanks is doing a very over-the-top, goofy performance. But that's also the point. The film is presenting Colonel Tom Parker as this big, goofy, over-the-top comic book villain contrasting Elvis Presley's superhero-like stature. And yes, I will not deny that Hanks is being a bit goofy and silly and is slightly inconsistent with the rest of the film. But also, he's just so much fun. I love that whole bit of the second act where he's just trying to get Elvis to sing Here Comes Santa Claus, and he's all just like, Here comes Santa Claus!
Here comes Santa Claus! Here comes Santa Claus. Here comes Santa Claus.
But also, just because he is this big goofy presence that isn't necessarily similar to the real-life Colonel Tom Parker, there are moments in the film where we do feel the sincerity of Hanks' performance. The scene where he consoles Elvis who's grieving after his mother and he's like, I will be there for you and I will worry. It's a very nice, touching, hard-hitting scene. And then also the scene in the Ferris wheel, where they're talking together and he's trying to get Elvis to join him and sign exclusively with him. You can really feel the connection and the bond between the two, and you can see why Elvis Presley would be drawn to him. In many ways, this film is an exploration between the dynamic between Elvis Presley and Colonel Tom Parker, their relationship, and how, in the end, whilst Elvis did die because he was obsessed with performing and was in love with performing for us, the audience, it was also the Colonel's fault because the Colonel trapped him in a deal that kept Elvis performing like a workhorse, basically working himself to death. And whilst the film might not be the most historically accurate retelling of Elvis Presley's story, the film doesn't really address the fact that Elvis Presley met a 14-year-old Priscilla Presley and presumably dated her when he was 24 years old. And yes, the film does also take certain historical events and merge them together, like this 68 comeback special with Elvis singing If I Can Dream, whilst also merging that together with Elvis's Christmas comeback special. But I think that works in favor for the film because yes, it's not historically accurate, but if you do those as separate events, it basically does just feel like you're going, and Elvis did this, and then he did this, and then he did this. And whilst the film does portray certain events like that, for example the montage where it highlights Elvis's acting career, you can't just have the entire film just be montage the movie, which some would argue it is, but also it does add a bit of a narrative conflict because without, the whole Christmas special conflicting with Elvis's comeback special, you won't really have much of a conflict in the second act. The supporting cast is also great all around. I love seeing David Wenham as Hank Snow just because every time I see David Wenham on screen, I just go, oh hey look, it's Faramir. I do also want to highlight Olivia DeJonge as Priscilla Presley because I think she's really good, but she is kind of just in the film. Priscilla isn't necessarily a focus point of the film, she's just kind of there to provide emotional support for Elvis, and she does do a good job in those scenes. But yeah, this film is not necessarily the true story between Elvis Presley and Priscilla Presley. Though I do just want to mention this, I think Olivia DeJonge is one of the most stunning women I've ever seen ever. Like, she looks amazing in this movie.
Lord have mercy.
Now let's talk about some of my favorite scenes in the film, and realistically there are a lot of scenes in this film that I just love and adore. Similar to June 2021, this film is kind of just on repeat for me because I love watching this movie, man. There's so many scenes where I'm just like, I love this, I love that, I love this. It's amazing. Young Elvis hearing the gospel choir was just a spiritual experience, man. Like, you just feel it. The way the music was thumping. I remember sitting there in the cinema just being like, oh my god, this is insane, but like in a good way. Elvis's first performance at the Louisiana Hayride was just such a great introductory scene. I mean, not only do we get Austin Butler's performance of Baby Let's Play House,
oh baby, 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 I won't play house with you.
but also I love the build up to that scene. The cross-cutting of young Elvis in the gospel church to Elvis recording That's Alright Little Mama to also Elvis singing I'll Fly Away. It's so good. Austin Butler's performance of Trouble at the Rustwood Park scene is incredible, and I love the changes they made to Trouble because obviously in the original, the way Elvis sings it, it's very much a smooth kind of like, if you're looking for trouble, na 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 na, you came to the right place, na 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 na. If you're looking for trouble, na 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 na, just look right in my face, na 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 na. I was born standing up, na 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 na, and talking back. My daddy was a green-eyed mountain jack. And you compare that to Austin's performance where he makes it more forceful and commanding and very much feeling like a rock concert performance, and it really just highlights the idea of sticking it to the man, you know? I was born standing up, talking back. Also, let's just address Austin Butler's physical performance, because I mean, every time he moves on screen, I just see effort. His whole performance just oozes effort in every frame. That's why I will say he is the best male lead performance of 2022, because every time he's just on screen, you just see effort. I also love the attention to detail in that scene, from the costuming to the set design, and the way they replicate these 16mm film pictures. It's so good. Now, I've mentioned them before, but the montage work done in this movie is amazing. This movie is basically made in the editing bay. I've read bits of the script of Elvis because they released it online, and looking at the script and what is on the screen, this movie is made in the editing bay. I love the Little Less Conversation / Viva Las Vegas montage that highlights Elvis's acting career. It's so good. The attention to detail, the bit where they deepfake Austin's face onto the actual footage of Elvis, Mwah!
A little less conversation, a little more action, please. All this aggravation is satisfaction in me.
The Polk Salad Annie montage and the Burning Love montage, which highlight Elvis's career in the International Hotel and his Hawaiian satellite concert. It's all so good.
A mean, straight razor total woman. Lord have mercy.
And this is where you also really get to see a lot of the costume designers' work and how they replicated Elvis's jumpsuits, because they all just look so good on screen. Even though they're only seen for like a split second, the attention to detail on them is just so cool. The Vegas rehearsal sequence where Elvis is constructing his Las Vegas show is so good. The way Austin Butler and the rest of the group perform the version of That's Alright Mama, oh, it's so good, man. And Austin is just giving it his everything in that scene, man. Like the little like fingering movements, and he's all just like ha 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 ha. Ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba. Again, like I said, the effort this man gives to this role is everything. And now getting on to probably my favourite sequence of the entire film, which is Elvis's opening night at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, where he performs Suspicious Minds and Can't Help Falling in Love. Just, it's such a great sequence, because not only are those my two favourite versions of Can't Help Falling in Love and Suspicious Minds, him performing it live in Vegas, but also Austin just does it so well, and Baz recreates it so well, and the costume designers and the set designers replicate it so well. Also, let me know in the comments which version of Suspicious Minds is your favorite. Is it the studio version where it's a bit more slower, or is it the live version? Because to me, I just love the live version. The little snare drum in the background going and the whole tempo of it being much faster. It's my favorite version. It's so catchy. And when we do get to the sequence where Elvis performs Can't Help Falling in Love, it's so operatic in a way, because in many ways that's the moment where the film signifies this is the beginning of the end for Elvis, because obviously we've just seen him walking around kissing all these girls and Priscilla's feeling all like jealous and left out, and we've also seen the Colonel making the shady deal keeping Elvis trapped in the International Hotel to perform for 5 years straight. But just everything down to the editing and the way it's, you know, scored and the way Austin Butler sings it, it just feels so grand and epic, and it does really just kind of feel like the idea that this is the beginning of the end. Especially that look from the Colonel as he's watching Elvis from behind the stage, and you can see that look in his eye of just like, I've doomed my boy, but also, look at him go, look at all the money I'm gonna make.
I love when he goes, can't help. So good.
If this film does not win Best Editing at the Oscars, I will be fairly shocked. I only say fairly because Everything Everywhere All at Once does use very similar editing techniques, and so if that won, I wouldn't be upset, but I feel like with Elvis, the movie's editing is on cocaine, and that's kind of its main, like, selling point. One of my favorite editing moments, because it's so stylized and so, like, over-the-top goofy, is the moment where the guy's just like, that's the thing. He's white. And then the camera just pushes into the Colonel, and then all of a sudden everything just starts like ramping up, and you start hearing Elvis in the background going, "That's alright, mama."
That's the thing. He's white.
He's white?
It's just so over the top, over dramatic, so stylized. I love it, all just because of the fact that it's going, Elvis is white. The film is just wonderfully stylish because it's a Baz Luhrmann film, and like, Baz Luhrmann is not my favorite director by any means, but I do like some of his work. I like his Romeo and Juliet, and his Great Gatsby starts off well enough. It's just a bit, it kind of fizzles out a bit. But when you think of making a musical biopic of Elvis Presley, I mean, yeah, Baz Luhrmann comes straight to mind, because Baz Luhrmann is grand and over the top with the glitz and the glamour, like Elvis Presley, so it's like a match made in heaven. It's funny, because when I first watched this film, I thought it was really good, but its main problem was that it was too long. But after watching it several times now, I actually don't think that's the case at all. I actually think the film is wonderfully paced. And I think one of the main reasons why that is because the soundtrack for this film really is what kind of drives the film. Its soundtrack is so powerful because it is doing most of the heavy work in telling the story, especially when it comes to the idea of embellishing themes and ideas, although it does go a bit too overboard with the whole "we're caught in a trap" thing, because they do use that over and over and over again. The new mix is done of Elvis's music is just so good. In many ways, they're just really addicting. Like, Suspicious Minds and Burning Love is just like on repeat in my ears because they're amazing. To me, they feel like cocaine. Not that I know what cocaine feels like, but that's how I imagine it to feel like. It's so addicting. And Baz Luhrmann has said that when it comes to Elvis's vocal performances in the film, for the most part, it is a blend between Austin and Elvis. All the young stuff is sung by Austin Butler, but when we get to the older version of Elvis Presley, it's a hybrid and blend of Austin and Elvis, and to me, I feel like you can tell the difference. I've seen comments from people being like, I can't tell the difference, and oh yeah, it's very clearly Elvis singing. No, I don't think so. I think that is giving Austin Butler a bit too little credit, because if you listen to the original Elvis performance or track, and then you compare it to the film version, there is a slight difference, and I feel like you can hear elements of Austin Butler's voice in the song. I also love some of the score and soundtrack mix hybrids that the film uses, like at the very beginning, where we kind of get the big sweeping shots of Las Vegas, and it's all just like, we're caught in a trap.
A shocking new book accuses
I
Colonel
can't
Tom
walk
Parker
out
of management.
because I love you too much, baby.
Parker received.
It's so good, like that whole idea of like feeling like it's on drugs because of the percussion, because of how quick and crazy the tempo is. There is just such an energy to this film. It feels like a bunch of gases, and it's just like shaking so violently until it just like explodes. Though I will say, a criticism I have of the soundtrack is I'm not a massive fan of the implementation of modern music in some of Elvis's classic songs. Like, I'm not in love with Doja Cat's remix of Hound Dog, and when it starts playing the film, I do find it to be quite jarring. I'm like, what the hell is it? This is a bit weird. And when Elvis performs Baby Let's Play House and the riff from Come Together starts playing, I don't hate it. It is kind of jarring for me though, because I do get why Baz Luhrmann did it. He's trying to simulate the idea that Elvis's performance in the 50s was very similar to how we would experience a performance in the modern day with a rock concert and a crazy riff like the one in Come Together. I just don't entirely love the juxtaposition of the older music with the newer music. But to wrap things up, Baz Luhrmann's Elvis was one of my favorite films of 2022. That and Top Gun Maverick are like my two favorites of last year. There is just something about this movie that is so incredibly stylistic and memorable. In many ways, this is my favorite musical biopic, because I think the best two musical biopics are this and Rocket Man, though I do give Elvis a slight nudge above Rocket Man just because it's Elvis Presley, and I prefer Elvis Presley more to Elton John. And not to be controversial or anything, but I feel like Elvis is the movie people thought Bohemian Rhapsody was, because I'm not a massive fan of Bohemian Rhapsody, like I think it's fine. And obviously for me, the main selling point of this movie is Austin Butler's performance as Elvis Presley, because it is phenomenal. He needs to win that Oscar. He's won the Golden Globe. He's won that BAFTA. He's coming for that Oscar. If he does not win, the Academy is rigged and I hate them. I'm joking. But also, not only do you have Austin Butler's performance, you have the whole creative vision of Baz Luhrmann and his creative team, that being the art department, the costume department, the makeup department. Everybody in the cast does a great job, including Tom Hanks, even though he is goofy. I don't care. I love how goofy he is because he fits thematically in the film. The editing work in this movie is awesome, and just this movie is just so memorable. It's just ingrained in my brain. But those are just my thoughts on Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. Leave me your thoughts on the film in the comments down below. And do you think Austin Butler should win the performance for Best Male Actor of 2022? Because he should. And if you think otherwise, you're wrong. I'm joking. Half joking. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. And until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time. And, thank you. Thank you very much.